These are the green machines of Bahrain that brought a multi-billion-dollar Formula One operation to a dead halt. On the final day of 2026 preseason testing, Aston Martin's track time was severely restricted. Friday morning dawned hot over the Bahrain International Circuit on February 20th, 2026, and the track immediately filled with the roaring engines of Ferrari and Mercedes banking dozens of key laps. Aston Martin kept their garage doors firmly shut, while their rivals gathered large amounts of telemetry data. Team officials abruptly canceled all scheduled press conferences for the day to deal with an unfolding crisis behind closed doors. Lance Stroll sat suited up inside the hospitality area instead of the cockpit, and the silence from the British outfit spoke volumes to the observing paddock. Missing track time during the final day of preseason testing guarantees a compromised start to the championship campaign in Melbourne. Every single minute counts when engineers need to validate complex wind tunnel data against real-world physics on the asphalt. The AMR-26 chassis remained untouched on its stands for the first 3 hours and 40 minutes of the morning session. Stroll eventually managed exactly 0 timed laps during that entire window. Mechanics only pushed the car out for 2 brief, untimed installation laps right before the lunch break to check basic system functionality. This vanishing act created huge confusion across the grandstands and the international broadcast feeds tracking the timing screens. Formula One teams operate on strict run plans designed months in advance to maximize their limited testing allowance. Abandoning a Friday program entirely requires a catastrophic failure of a major component or a basic design flaw that makes driving completely unsafe. Rumors quickly spread down the pit lane regarding the brand-new Honda power unit bolted into the back of the car. The team invested huge capital into this specific season to fight for world championships directly against Red Bull. Billionaire owner Lawrence Stroll recruited the greatest aerodynamic mind in motorsport history to design this exact vehicle from scratch. Pairing a legendary engineer with a proven Japanese engine supplier created sky-high expectations for the green team heading into the new regulatory era. Seeing the car trapped inside the garage on the most heavily monitored data-gathering day of the year signaled a huge miscalculation somewhere within their advanced Silverstone factory. That meant the mechanics faced an uphill battle just to get the car functioning properly before the freight planes departed for Australia. The silence stretching across the Aston Martin garage provided a stark contrast to the relentless activity happening everywhere else in the pit lane. Team principal Andy Cowell paced the pit wall, analyzing blank timing screens instead of race simulations. The highly limited data points collected by noon meant their entire weekend preparation strategy instantly evaporated into thin air. Engineers stared at empty computer monitors while the clock ticked down on their championship aspirations. The nightmare actually began on Wednesday when Lance Stroll spun out into the gravel trap. Fernando Alonso triggered a massive red flag on Thursday afternoon when his car abruptly lost all drive exiting Turn 4. The two-time world champion parked the AMR-26 beside the barrier and safely made his way back to the pit lane. Honda engineers instantly swarmed the telemetry monitors and identified a severe battery-related issue within the hybrid systems. The Japanese manufacturer officially confirmed a severe battery-related issue and a shortage of power unit parts. Their technical directors immediately transmitted the failure data back to the Sakura headquarters to run emergency simulations on their test benches. Discovering a severe battery defect this late in the development cycle forces engineers to redesign cooling pathways and software deployment maps on the fly. A suspected fault forced the team to abandon their initial run, delaying Stroll's appearance until just before the lunch break. Fortunately, power unit failures during preseason testing do not count toward the championship allocation or trigger grid penalties. A staggering 300 gigabytes of corrupted telemetry flooded the servers before the car finally died. Destroying a power unit after just 42 laps on Thursday forced the extreme Friday lockdown. The medical car arrived quickly at the scene to ensure the driver escaped the smoking chassis without inhaling toxic battery fumes. Transporting the damaged vehicle back to the pit lane required a flatbed truck covered in heavy tarps to hide the rear wing designs from rival photographers. Team ambassador Pedro de la Rosa faced the media cameras on Friday and dropped a highly concerning piece of information. The garage lacked the necessary backup components to replace the broken systems quickly. A general shortage of replacement parts left the mechanics highly restricted during the rebuilding process. Emergency test simulations at the Honda facility in Sakura meant the team faced major delays getting the car back on track in Bahrain. Formula One teams are strictly limited to just 3 complete power units per driver for the entire racing season. Aston Martin arrived with exactly 1 fully assembled specification for the hybrid system, which vaporized any margin for error, which meant the engineers had to cobble together older specification parts just to make the car start safely on Friday afternoon. Running a compromised engine forces the drivers to stay far away from the performance limits to prevent another catastrophic breakdown. Relying on outdated components during the final dress rehearsal perfectly explains why the timing sheets showed the green cars languishing at the bottom of the order. Running a modern racing operation demands precision logistics across multiple continents simultaneously. The freight planes bringing extra carbon fiber and metallic components from the United Kingdom faced unexpected routing delays over Eastern Europe. Watching a top-tier racing operation scramble for basic replacement parts reveals the brutal reality of modern motorsport engineering. The pressure cooker of the paddock breaks even the most heavily funded teams when supply chains collapse at the worst possible moment. If you are finding this breakdown of the Aston Martin crisis interesting, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell right now. We cover these fast-moving automotive stories every single week to keep you completely updated on the grid. Returning to the chaos unfolding inside the Bahrain garage, the situation demanded extreme measures to salvage any useful track time. The engineering team adapted their Friday run plan and implemented a very limited schedule of short stints for the remaining session. The intense scrutiny from the global media makes every single mistake painfully visible to sponsors and fans alike. Trackside director Mike Crack instructed the garage crew to revise the testing schedule for the Friday afternoon session. The team strictly limited Lance Stroll to extremely brief stints to prevent the replacement hybrid systems from overheating. Mechanics forced the car back into the garage after every single run for a mandatory 30-minute cooling and data verification period. This agonizingly slow rhythm destroyed any chance of conducting proper race distance simulations or tire degradation studies. Engineers pored over the live telemetry during these extended breaks, searching for any voltage irregularities in the energy recovery system. Operating under these extreme restrictions meant the driver could never build a proper rhythm or generate optimal tire temperatures. And that is a massive problem when trying to correlate the aerodynamic behavior of a completely new chassis design. Completing a meager total of 15 carefully managed laps by sunset provided almost zero useful feedback for the aerodynamics department back in Britain. The heat radiating off the Middle Eastern desert asphalt only compounded the cooling problems for the engineers. Mechanics blasted dry ice directly into the side pods, trying to bring the internal temperatures down to a safe operating window. This Bahrain disaster actually represents the second major technical and build failure for the team in just 2 months. Aston Martin completely missed the first 3 days of their private shakedown test at the Barcelona circuit back in January 2026. Manufacturing delays inside the carbon fiber department prevented the chassis from passing the mandatory crash structures tests on time. Arriving late to the Spanish circuit cost them roughly 500 miles of early systems verification running. Combine that Spanish absence with the Bahrain battery issue, and the sheer lack of mileage becomes truly alarming. The AMR26 completed fewer than 400 total laps across the entire preseason testing period. Comparing that figure to the roughly 800 laps banked by their direct competitors highlights a devastating competitive disadvantage. The engineers possess barely a third of the real-world data required to properly tune the complex mechanical suspension systems. Missing out on that much track time creates a massive blind spot for the setup crew heading into the opening race. The European winter weather also played a factor during those early Spanish tests, but the sheer lack of mechanical preparation caused the most damage. Sponsors paying millions for logo placement watched angrily as their advertisements sat hidden away inside a closed transporter truck. The lack of mileage directly translates into a shocking lack of outright speed on the stopwatch. Lance Stroll faced reporters late Friday evening and dropped an absolute bombshell regarding the true pace of the green machine. Objective timing data showed the car sits almost 4.5 seconds behind the fastest teams on a single lap. Losing 4 seconds over a 3.36-mile circuit represents an eternity in a sport measured by thousandths of a second. Running the compromised power unit mapping forced the drivers to lift off the throttle incredibly early on the main straights. But engine problems alone cannot fully explain a performance deficit of that massive magnitude. The aerodynamic platform clearly suffers from severe instability when the car navigates the high-speed sweeping corners of the middle sector. Stroll admitted the steering wheel feedback felt completely disconnected from the front tires during the few push laps he attempted. Driving a nervous and unpredictable car destroys driver confidence instantly. Engineers usually expect a brand new car to require several setup changes before finding optimal grip levels. The current chassis violently rejects those setup changes and continues sliding unpredictably across the heavy braking zones. Despite the burning engines and the terrifying stopwatch deficits, Fernando Alonso maintained an unexpectedly calm demeanor in the paddock. The veteran driver told the media he holds zero doubts about the team eventually transforming the AMR26 into a race winner. His absolute confidence stems entirely from the presence of legendary managing technical partner Adrian Newey leading the overall technical vision. Newey holds a famous reputation for identifying hidden aerodynamic performance that other engineers completely overlook. The brilliant designer is currently leading a massive overall restructuring of the engineering team ahead of his new role. History proves that teams guided by Newey often start testing slowly before introducing massive aerodynamic upgrade packages at the first European race. Alonso understands that the current specification of the car represents merely a rough baseline rather than the final product. The Spanish driver firmly believes the engineering group will completely change the car and close the massive gap in time for the season opener in Melbourne. The British genius spent hours walking up and down the pit lane holding his famous red notebook and sketching the floor designs of the Mercedes and Ferrari cars. The data collected from simply observing the competition often leads to massive performance breakthroughs inside the factory. This disastrous final test day heavily strains the newly formed marriage between the British racing team and the Japanese engine manufacturer. As documented by official Formula One records and Honda racing history, Honda previously dominated the sport with Red Bull, making this sudden unreliability a massive shock to the entire paddock. Designing power units for the strict 2026 regulations forces manufacturers to balance immense electrical output against extreme weight limitations. The catastrophic battery failure suggests the Sakura engineering team pushed the packaging limits slightly too far for the cooling systems to handle. According to Formula One official announcements regarding 2026 engine partnerships, Aston Martin abandoned a highly reliable customer engine supply to become the exclusive factory partner for Honda this season. Taking on factory status brings enormous financial benefits, but forces the team to absorb the painful early development curve directly. The Silverstone engineers must now redesign the internal bodywork to force more cooling air directly over the vulnerable battery packs, which means sacrificing precious aerodynamic downforce just to ensure the car physically finishes the 58 laps of the Australian Grand Prix, according to Formula One. The corporate executives watching from the hospitality suite expect immediate results after signing such a lucrative partnership deal. The Japanese brand cannot afford public humiliation after dominating the previous regulatory cycle so convincingly. The immediate fallout from this testing disaster severely alters the competitive order for the entire first quarter of the 2026 season. Aston Martin will arrive at the Albert Park circuit in Melbourne, operating purely in damage limitation mode. Engineers will likely force Alonso and Stroll to run highly conservative engine modes during the opening race to guarantee they cross the finish line safely. Sacrificing outright speed for basic reliability guarantees the team will struggle to score any meaningful points in the early championship rounds. Viewers should expect to see the green cars fighting desperately in the lower half of the midfield, rather than challenging for podium trophies. This massive initial setback also places intense pressure on the mid-season development race happening back at the factory. According to the FIA, every single dollar of the cost cap budget must now focus on fixing the cooling issues instead of adding performance upgrades. Rival teams will aggressively push their own development programs forward, while Aston Martin remains stuck solving basic operational problems. The timeline for bringing the car to the front of the grid just shifted from April to potentially late August. Operating under a strict financial ceiling means the team cannot simply throw endless money at the problem to catch up faster. But counting out a team heavily backed by billionaire funding and guided by Adrian Newey remains a foolish bet for any motorsport fan. The raw data collected during those few agonizingly slow laps still provides a baseline for the aerodynamics department to manipulate in the simulator. Honda possesses immense engineering resources and will undoubtedly run their test benches 24 hours a day to solve the battery defect. The Japanese manufacturer previously overcame far worse reliability issues during their 2015 return to the sport and ultimately built a championship-dominating engine. They hold a deep pride in their engineering capabilities and will refuse to let this failure define their new era. The real story to watch involves the development speed over the next 3 months of international competition across the globe. Aston Martin must radically accelerate their manufacturing processes to ensure a steady supply of updated spare parts reaches the track. The tension between Alonso's famous impatience and the slow, methodical engineering recovery will provide massive drama behind the scenes. Formula One heavily rewards teams that can rapidly engineer their way out of a crisis under extreme public scrutiny. The grid order established in Bahrain rarely matches the final championship standings, precisely because of this relentless development war. The missing Friday track time perfectly illustrates the brutal, unforgiving nature of the new technical regulations governing the cars. Teams simply cannot hide a faulty design or a broken supply chain from the glaring lights of the pit lane. Every single failure happens directly in front of the global television audience watching at home. The empty garage in Bahrain proves that billions of dollars cannot buy reliable track time in modern Formula One. Whether Adrian Newey can salvage this broken machine remains the biggest story of 2026. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more.